Hello, everyone. Welcome to Co-Sheltering and Climate Change, Protecting People and Pets in a Changing World. My name is Allison Cardona. I'll be the moderator for this session. I am a board member here at My Dog is My Home. I'm also the California State Director for the UC Davis Koret Shelter Medicine Program. It's really an honor to be on the board of this organization and to see the incredible work being done to keep people and pets together in any type of housing setting. And I'm really excited to moderate this panel today. So today's session is really about climate change and climate change acceleration and its devastating impacts on housing, displacement, and homelessness that affects both people and pets. And this session is bringing together research and real-world experience to explore the intersection of climate-driven crises and the urgent need for co-sheltering options. You're going to be hearing from three incredible folks in this field. Lexis Lai, first, who is a current PhD student with the University of British Columbia's Animal Welfare Program. Her work focuses on one welfare, a concept that links the well-being of humans, animals, and the environment. And she researches animal shelter programs that aim to maintain human-animal bonds, reduce intake, and increase adoption of shelter animals. After that, after her presentation, we'll be having a panel discussion with two incredible folks from Pasadena Humane. Laura Lampley joined Pasadena Humane in early 2021, bringing a passion for animal welfare and community support. Her journey in the field began with volunteer work in Denver, Colorado, which inspired her to start her own nonprofit dedicated to helping community cats. After returning to her home state of California, she spent several years working in the tech industry before deciding to follow her heart back into animal welfare. In her current role, Laura oversees the Animal Resource Center, Community Cat Program, and Helping Paws Program, each designed to provide resources that help keep animals with those who love them. She's deeply committed to finding creative solutions, removing barriers, and reshaping how communities and animal shelters work together. And finally, but certainly not least, Chris Ramon joined Pasadena Humane in 2018. Prior to that, he oversaw a high-volume adoptions program at multiple locations while working for the Michelson Found Animals Foundation. He also offered insights into growing adoption and foster programs while occupying a seat on the board of directors for different animal welfare organizations. I should say that Chris is now the interim president and CEO of the Pasadena Humane Society. And so in addition to his role doing all of that, he also oversees community programs, humane education, admissions, and placement. Chris is passionate about building and expanding programs that enable animal shelters and the communities they serve to work together to overcome the challenges of our industry. So I'll now hand it over to Lexis for her presentation, and then we'll switch over to Pasadena Humane, who will focus on the practical nature of co-sheltering and admissions. Lexis, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Allison. I'm really thrilled to be sharing this space with Laura and Chris today. Like Allison said, my name is Lexis, and I'm a PhD candidate with the BC Animal Welfare Program. Just before I get started, I do want to recognize that I'm presenting today from Vancouver, Canada, which is situated on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And because we're discussing the environment and climate change, I do think it's important to recognize that the land that I'm on is unceded, meaning that it was never given up. It was instead stolen from Indigenous people. So who am I and why do I get the privilege to talk about climate change today? I am totally humbled and a little bit scared to be talking about such a big topic because I do come from an animal welfare background. Like Allison said, I work mainly in animal sheltering, focused on One Welfare and One Health. And generally this interest in One Welfare and the idea of like how we can include the environment when we're considering animal shelters and companion animals. This thought kind of led my colleagues and I to write a review trying to identify links between climate change and companion animals. Some of the research that we included in this review I'll be talking about today. I'm also the proud mother to Boo, who's in this photo with me. And I'm also a cat owner in a non-pet friendly building. So I myself have experienced some barriers to having my cat with me. And then recently in the Pacific Northwest, there has been a lot of concern over escalating earthquakes. I felt my first few earthquakes this year in Vancouver since my time living here. This is all just to say that I recognize that I'm not a climate scientist. As well, I'm also in the privileged position to be talking about this topic as somebody who has not had lived experience of having to migrate due to climate events. And so I'm really grateful to be here to share some space with folks from various backgrounds and experiences that all have a similar goal of increasing pet inclusivity in housing spaces. That being said, I do feel like my role as a researcher can help potentially give some information and maybe just give some thoughts to bring back to your organizations and to your communities about this relationship between climate and co-sheltering. So today we're going to be talking about what climate-induced migration or displacement is. And then I'm also going to touch on a little bit of the research that has been done in this area, talking about how climate displacement impacts companion animals and guardians, housing vulnerability, and then to merge those two things together, pet-friendly housing. So we're going to be talking about how climate change exacerbates housing instability and the unique challenges that are faced with by people with animals during displacement. And so in the context of climate-induced migration and displacement, the concept of home is changing. And this means that it's changing for individuals that are directly impacted by this climate event, the communities that they leave and they enter, and also as a society and as a country, we're constantly changed by these events. And so this quote I really liked and really set the stage for the research that I was doing for this presentation. In migration contexts, home becomes an explicitly dynamic process involving acts of imagining, creating, unmaking, changing, losing, and moving homes. And so home is more than a physical shelter. It's also a sense of belonging and security. And I think that just to realign everybody, and I'm sure that everybody here knows that it's also about kind of the people that you're around and also the animals that you're around as well. So what is climate-induced displacement? Generally, this refers to any sort of moving that's due to the effects of climate change. You might hear the terms climate-induced displacement and climate-induced migration in different contexts. Some people like to distinguish between these two depending on the cause of the moving. And so displacement is often used to describe moving due to sudden onset climate disasters, so like wildfires. Whereas migration is sometimes used to refer to slower onset climate impacts like desertification or sea level rise. I will use both of these terms to mean the same general concept, so I'll be using them kind of interchangeably today because I do recognize that in both cases, there are lots and lots of social and environmental factors that force people to move, and that's kind of the baseline of what we're talking about. And then to put into context, in 2022, 3.2 million US adults were displaced or evacuated due to natural disasters. And this graph here shows that by the beginning of 2023, so 1 year later, more than 500,000 of the people who were displaced in the year before hadn't returned to their household. So these changes can be very long lasting and be quite permanent. So like I mentioned, climate-induced displacement can happen due to multiple different climate-related impacts. It can be due to climate processes. So these are considered kind of slower onset impacts of climate change, like sea level rise and desertification. As an example, sea level rise along the US coast is expected to rise anywhere between 10 to 12 inches on average in the next 30 years, which is as much sea level rise that has been happening over the past 100 years. And so it's expected to increase quite a bit before or in the next 30 years. And the impacts of this would be that we might see just generally impacts of decreased land use along the coastline, but also that flooding, minor flooding, major flooding may be expected to occur anywhere between 5 to 10 times as often as it does today. There are also climate events. These are sudden onset events, so this could include things like flooding or storms or wildfires. And again, we know that climate change is impacting the frequency and severity of these events. So for example, wildfire season length is increasing, the frequency is increasing, and we know that the amount of area that's being burned every summer is likely to increase as well. And then intersecting with these climate factors are what we call non-environmental drivers. And so this includes things like political, economic, social, and demographic factors. And so, for example, when we're thinking about climate processes, maybe like desertification, while maybe desertification in itself might not push or pull people, there are also a lot of other factors, maybe job loss, maybe lack of food availability in an area that would also impact those, particularly those who are vulnerable, to be displaced due to climate impacts. So what do we know currently about where climate migrants go? We know that most of them travel relatively short distances, typically within their state. And oftentimes this is because of social connection. So people want to stay near those that they love, and they also want to stay in places where they feel cultural belonging. You might also hear terms floating around more often now, like safe harbors or climate havens. Typically, people use the term safe harbor to talk about cities that are in a more climate vulnerable region that will continue to grow as people relocate from smaller, more at-risk places nearby. And so the easiest example of this might be if you moved from the coast of Florida, inland in Florida, and then climate havens might be along further distances, and these are considered more resilient regions. So maybe they have a little bit less climate vulnerability, but they also might have other non-climate related benefits, like maybe availability of housing or jobs. But I do think that with these terms, it's important to note that these terms don't necessarily mean that the cities that are safe harbors or climate havens have necessarily done the preparation and planning to be able to be prepared for an influx of migrants. So maybe if I have one action item for everybody, it's to take a look at where you are on the map in terms of, are you at an at-risk area? Are you maybe a more safe harbor area or a climate haven area? And think about what your organization has role in the broader scheme of climate migration might be due to the impacts that I'll talk about coming up. So what do we know about how companion animals themselves intersect with climate migration? Most of this research in this area has been done to understand the risks of pet ownership during climate events. So in one review that was published recently, they summarized this by finding that the research generally talked about companion animals as a risk to human health and safety. And this was mostly discussed as a risk for non-evacuation compliance and risky behaviors. So maybe people who come back to an evacuation zone to try to rescue their animals. But this research generally concludes that pet ownership itself is not a risk of evacuation failure, like many might think, but rather it's barriers that are associated with pet ownership that might make people less likely to evacuate or perhaps do these risky behaviors. So these pet-related barriers include things like lack of transportation for them and their pets, lack of pet supplies or emergency pet supplies, and then, of course, lack of pet-friendly emergency sheltering. And then as well, companion animals are at risk themselves during climate events. And so we know that owned and unowned animals are at an increased risk of disease and injury and just generally poor welfare during times of disaster. We also know it's quite clear now that animals are an important part of this dynamic idea of family, and this has been demonstrated over and over again through these really intense disasters that have happened. Research from Hurricane Katrina definitely highlighted this. So in one study, they compared individuals who had been displaced from their homes, those with pets and those without pets. They found that pet loss was a predictor of depressive and post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms. So it's extremely distressing for people to be separated from their pets. But also they compared those who were displaced with and without pets, and they found that the effect of pet loss was actually larger than the effect of being displaced from their home. However, one area where there's not very much research is kind of beyond this research that's done directly after disaster events. So most of the research that currently exists focus a lot on evacuation compliance and the ability to respond to the veterinary needs of animals and, of course, the well-being of people. Less consideration is given for how the people who are displaced end up rebuilding and finding their community again. This lovely quote from Christine and Mason from My Dog is My Home noted that once temporary relief operations for natural disasters conclude, the responsibility for sheltering often shifts to the conventional homeless system. And so what do we know about housing vulnerability after displacement? We know that housing costs increase after disaster. This is due to an increase in housing supply caused by the damage, but also an increase in housing need from those who are displaced. We know that the rental costs might be raised to meet repair and rebuilding costs. The rebuilding might also be much more complicated due to new regulatory and insurance changes. So we know that renters are also just more likely to be vulnerable in these cases. To add on to this, studies have shown that evictions unfortunately increase in the year following disasters, and this can be due to a lot of different reasons, like landlords needing to make renovations to meet new housing standards, or perhaps due to landlords wanting to take advantage of the high demand market. So very little research has been done taking a look at pet-friendly housing after displacement. There is one study from Taryn Graham, who took a look at online listings 1 year post-flooding in Calgary, Canada, which is my hometown. These floods hit in 2013, and when they hit, the city had the lowest vacancy rates in any Canadian city. And so 1 year after the flooding, Taryn took a look at the rental ads that were offered by landlords. And she found that only 9% of rental ads were actually pet friendly or marked as pet friendly. But within that, most of them had, or many of them had some sort of breed or size restriction. And so truly only 5% of the listings that were posted on this platform had absolutely no pet related restrictions. The other thing she looked at was supply and demand. So she looked at listings that were offered by landlords compared to the wanted ads that were posted by prospective tenants. And of the listings that were marked as pet friendly, 199 of them were landlords that were offering pet friendly housing, while 249 of them were tenants who wanted pet friendly housing. So that shows that there is this mismatch in terms of supply and demand for pet friendly housing. Karen also found that the wanted listings from potential tenants described difficulties in finding pet-friendly temporary shelter. So this individual said, I'd go to a homeless shelter, but they won't allow my cat. My cat has been with me for 12 years. He flew here with me, and there's no way I'd give him up. Please consider allowing him to. And so again, this highlights the intersections between all these vulnerabilities, particularly those who are seeking temporary sheltering and hoping to also find permanent sheltering later on. And then the other thing I want to highlight is that while it can be difficult for people to find pet-friendly housing, another thing that can actually just change a lot itself is the human-animal relationship. And so there are this study that is here did interviews with dog owners after an earthquake that happened in New Zealand in 2011. And one of the main themes that they found in this study was that participants experienced a lot of reprioritization about what they considered most important in their lives. And a lot of this was about the nature of their bond with their dog. And so some participants experienced higher levels of stress because they were concerned about the earthquake or potential subsequent earthquakes that might impact the welfare of their animal. So this individual said, I probably felt more responsible for her than I did before. Some people talked about placing extra protection around their dogs' crates while they're at work, or even changing their lifestyle, so maybe taking their dogs with them to different parts of the country. But then, of course, on the other hand, there were so many people in this study who highlighted really how unfortunate it was to have animals in their lives during this transition. And so lots of people talked about the positives and the support that was there, thanks to them being able to remain with their animals. And this included things like being able to establish old or new routines and responsibilities in their home. And so generally, we know that companion animals have largely been discussed in research in the context of climate events, mostly focusing on evacuation and disaster response. There is, on the other hand, a lot less research about the long-term effects of owning pets on finding pet-friendly housing after disasters happen, as well as lack of literature on how the human-animal bond can change after disasters and what potential supports might be beneficial to help people keep their pets and also keep that bond. And so as climate change accelerates housing instability, I think that the question that we should ask is how we can support people and pets in rebuilding their home. And I think that it's quite clear that displacement imposes a lot of stress on multi-species families. And I think that another thing to highlight through the research is that the additional challenge of finding pet-friendly housing and maintaining the human-animal bond is really, really important in the future. All right, I'll pass it off.
Thank you so much, Lexis. It's really important to hear the research, and I appreciate all the work that you're doing to bring this forward. And so now we're going to bring on Chris Ramon and Laura Lampley from Pasadena Humane to talk about some of the practical implications of co-sheltering and what it looks like to help people and pets during disasters. So just want to make sure that they can get spotlighted as well. Perfect. Thank you. So Chris, Laura, why don't you share with us, our attendees are from around the country, around the world. I live here in Los Angeles, so I'm very familiar with the work that Pasadena Humane does. But why don't you share with everyone else a little bit about your organization and the role you normally play in the community?
Sure. Thank you, Allison, and thank you, Lexis. That was an amazing presentation. So Pasadena Humane is a private nonprofit who also holds city contracts. So we have a big chunk of the San Gabriel Valley that we service. We're one of 2 shelters in Southern California that's licensed to rehabilitate wildlife, and I'm sure that that'll kind of explain why that was important during the Eaton fire response. We're an open admission shelter, and we service roughly about 480,000 people within our service area. But we pride ourselves on being more than a shelter. It sometimes feels like we play different roles in the community. Over the past couple of years, a lot of the policies and programs that we have been shaped by listening to what the community needs. We've done a lot of work to try and move away from a punitive, kind of old school sheltering ideology that kind of errs on or one side of local ordinances or state laws. We have in-house animal control, but again, the ideology there is to be community forward and seeing where we can meet the community where they are. And yeah, that's kind of a snapshot of what we do.
Yes, so you've been doing this for a long time. And then for those who may recall, in January, devastating fires hit the Los Angeles area. And sometimes people think of LA, just the city, but it's the larger Los Angeles County. There was the Palisades fire and then the Eaton fire at the same time. I will ask you to talk about your role. I did want to make a note that I think oftentimes people who are outside the sphere of a disaster are very curious and want to know what was it like, what happened. And I just really want to name for the 2 of you that you are first responders and that you experienced this. This is your community. These are your friends, family, people, and pets. And so I just really want to be mindful of that. And please, I hope that this conversation can be about the role that you played, but share or don't share. This is not for anyone's entertainment. So I just really wanted to note that and respect and admire the 2 of you so much. But if you could talk about your role in the Eaton fire and how you managed the displacement of people and pets would be lovely.
Sure. I could take a first pass at this, and then Laura, feel free to jump in.
Sure.
I'm sure that I may forget something. So As Allison said, we're kind of in the middle of just the greater Los Angeles County map, and Altadena is one of the areas that we are contracted with to provide sheltering and animal control services. So when the fire broke out, it was immediately in our service area, and it's interesting because I think, Allison, you had mentioned like curiosity from people who haven't experienced this. And I think that, at least at a leadership level, um, there's often been within our organization, there's been conversations about what would happen if, and trying to develop an emergency plan that could kind of cater to a variety of different scenarios. Um, and I feel like we barely had the nuts and bolts of what we needed. And it was a lot of just jumping into action. Laura was one of the people who was um, affected, the night of. She wasn't forced to evacuate, but that is one of the vivid memories I have of that night was Laura calling and saying that she was packing up her animals and coming to the shelter just out of precaution. And then, getting that phone call a few hours later, as, everything was on fire and just saying like, the community needs us right now. And so it was a lot of jumping into action. It was a lot of reprioritizing where we need to put our resources. It was also a moment of humility where, I had to realize there's no way that we can service this community or respond to this natural disaster by ourselves. Um, and so, there was a series of phone calls that happened to other state and national agencies, um, because, I knew that there was going to be an extensive search and rescue effort. Um, there was also going to be, the part of our service area that was not directly affected by the fire that would still need us for regular services. Um, it was about utilizing our officers. But also, that first 24 hours kind of seeing we did not have the housing capacity to cater to everything that we needed. I think that we're almost to a point where we can joke now, but the amount of koi fish ponds, the amount of livestock, the amount of trailers needed to transport horses that all lived in Altadena was beyond our capacity and probably beyond the capacity of any shelter. Um, I don't, I don't know that I've never seen a shelter that had been built, that would be built to service that large influx within 72 hours. So, we were lucky that we were able to lean into a lot of the relationships that we had with other sheltering organizations to transfer out available animals that had already been in our care. Because when I got the phone call from Laura that night, there was already close to 100 people lined up around the block in the middle of the night with their animals. And it was heartbreaking because it happened so quickly. I also have to say I think that in hindsight, it is easy for people to pass judgment on why they brought their animals here. Um, but a lot of people weren't even home when the evacuation order came. The fire just traveled that quickly. The winds exceeded more than 120 miles an hour that night. And so, that's where a big chunk of our search and rescue efforts came, was from people who called us, never had a chance to go back to their home to collect their belongings, but called out of desperation to say, my dog is in my house. Can you please go get him? So that, in addition to um, the nearly 900 animals that we took over the course of the week, um, is kind of is a part of the role that we played in responding to that.
Yeah, and I just want to say I was in a unique position because I evacuated out of, I live in Pasadena, just south of Altadena. And I saw how fast the winds were moving, how the trees were basically almost bent in half. So as soon as the fire started, I realized this was going to be very terrible and it was going to move very quickly. I grew up in California. We're not unfamiliar with wildfires. And so I felt it was necessary to evacuate, especially with down trees, down branches. But I was like, oh, well, maybe if, some people come to the shelter, I'll be able to help them since I'm there already. And I had no idea what was going to unravel and how quickly it did. Honestly, I didn't even have time to think or look at a disaster protocol or anything. I just immediately started handing out forms, asking people what they needed. There was a mix of people who had pets in their hands, dogs in their cars. Some people said, I can handle my dog. I can't, manage my 4 cats, wherever I'm going. Some folks just wanted litter boxes. It was a whole array of needs. And obviously everyone was very stressed and panicked. And I did my best to try and, when I was able to come inside, have them sit down, offer them the restroom. Do you need any water? Those kinds of things. And for me, I think that did go a long way. But I could never imagined how you can imagine a disaster, but I honestly, it happens before your eyes and it feels like you're having an out of body experience, honestly, you know? And so that's when those instincts are really important. People were like, how long do we have? I didn't know what to say to them because they were still doing evacuations as the fire moved through the area. And I just said, we'll figure it out. Don't worry about that. Just worry about getting, with your pet to safety, or if you have to have us help with your pet, we'll take care of your pet so you can take care of yourself and your family. There's people with kids, everything that you can imagine, walking up to the door, and I did everything I can to get them out of there as quickly as possible with whatever they needed, just so that they can focus on what's going on with them, and we can focus on the animals if they were being taken into our care. But I don't know if you can write a protocol that would, prepare you or cover all the things that you're going to encounter. So it truly, for me, was it was a very difficult experience, but I feel like everything that's happened to me in my life prepared me for this, truly. So I was happy I was there.
I'll also add that our role in responding to this has not ended. The fire was contained a couple of weeks after it initially broke out, but then there were rainstorms and mudslides. It is going to take people years who wish to rebuild that amount of time to try and do that, for a variety of different reasons. So our commitment to helping our community rebuild, even if that means we're going to need to find a housing solution for some of them, hasn't ended just because the fire is contained. And I think that is the other lesson that we're learning here is, the road to recovery and what it means to play a role in responding to that doesn't end when the disaster itself is contained. Because I think that people will be rebuilding for several years.
Yeah.
Thank you both for sharing so vulnerably. I was thinking about what you said about the 100 people lined up, and how, Chris, you also mentioned that it wouldn't be possible to build to have a shelter big enough for all of those animals. So can you talk a little bit about, historically, the Red Cross, who handles a lot of the human shelters, has played it sort of case by case in terms of when animals are admitted or not. Can you share a little bit about how that played out during this event and what steps you all took to advocate for the change?
Sure. So you're correct. Historically, when there have been much more mild natural disasters or any type of situation that has required residents within our service area to leave their homes, or if there's any mandated evacuations, the Red Cross will set up an evacuation center as a safe haven for those people to go to. Historically, we have set up adjacent to wherever the evacuation center has been, either with an animal control officer or our mobile adoptions unit that would either be able to transport any of those animals to our shelter for emergency boarding, or if it's expected that the evacuation order would be lifted in a very small amount of time, we would house them in our mobile adoption unit so that their owners wouldn't have to be too far away from them, could pop in, still offer them enrichment, take them out for walks, and wouldn't have to go to the shelter. That's historically how that relationship has panned out. Um, during the Eaton fire, I wish that I could say that uh, there was a very calm and composed approach to trying to deal with this, but for everybody, tensions were very high. Um, because the fire, the rate at containment um, was so slow that it just made it feel like this was never going to end, and it just kept getting worse before it was getting better. And a lot of things that are just way above what we had control of. And so um, many people, not knowing that that's the historical relationship between the Red Cross and an animal control agency or Pasadena Humane, arrived at the evacuation center. And, at first they were being told, that they would need to, shelter their animals other places. And some of those people ended up coming to the shelter. But again, there was so much emotion around this that to see people forced with no other option other than to give up their animal after they've lost everything, forced a conversation where I had a conversation with our liaison and with somebody at the Red Cross because they were insisting that we would, house those animals. And this was around the time that we were starting to come up with creative solutions for housing. Um, but an influx of another 50 to 70 animals wasn't something that we could handle. And so I guess what I'm dancing around was there was just a very impassioned conversation where the Red Cross was implored to just look at this from a human level. These people have lost their lives. They've lost everything that they've spent their lives trying to build. And it seems inhumane to the person and to the animal as, another action to strip them away of the one thing that they have that's comforting them right now. And so, once tensions became a little bit more mild and manageable, there was conversations around out of the box solutions that hopefully have created a precedent. And so, there was an offer from us to say, if these people are allowed to stay at the evacuation center with their animals, what would that look like if we supplied them with all of, the supplies that they need, with crates for cats so that, they weren't going to be running around and they wouldn't go missing. We provided through one of our national agency partners, veterinarians to go through and start administering preventative vaccines for all the reasons that we know. Um, and outdoor potty areas, because that was the biggest complaint that we were getting from the Red Cross, was that volume of animals needing to use the bathroom without an established area. But there was an easy fix to that: astroturf and poop bags. And I can laugh about that, but when you think about the cost of buying some astroturf and a case of poop bags, and the value that you get in not having to have animals separated from their owners in a time like this, it seems like a no-brainer to me. But that was the approach. It was out of desperation, and again, a very impassioned conversation around trying to put ourselves in the position that the people who were affected by the fire, who have lost everything, had. Um, I remember telling them, like, we can't sit here and imagine what it's like to lose our home and everything in it, and then be asked to give up my cat or my dog. Because I know if I were in that position, that, I don't know that I would be able to do that. So it worked. And, for the duration of the evacuation center, people were allowed to stay with their animals. And even as new people who needed that service were showing up, they weren't being turned away because there was already this infrastructure in place to put in a request for supplies that were needed. And there was no request that we couldn't fulfill. Some took a little bit longer than others, but mainly it was it was a model that a lot of people here already know. It's connect them with the services and the supplies that they need, and people get to keep their animals, and it is much easier for everyone.
Yeah. I mean, listening to Lexis's presentation and about the human animal bond after a disaster really made me think about you know, the fact that some people had minutes to evacuate, all they could grab was the people and the pets in the home, and not everyone was able to even do that. So they literally left with nothing in their hands except for their animals and, you know, maybe a keepsake that they were able to grab quickly because their homes were already on fire by the time they were driving away. So to go through this experience, which I can't imagine what that's like, and then show up somewhere and they're like, actually, you're gonna have to take that and, you know, bring them over there, is heartbreaking. So there were a significant amount of people that were coming to the shelter not to board their pets with us, but they were just seeking supplies that they didn't have time to grab. You know, the most common item was litter boxes and litter, because they were like able to grab their cats. They couldn't grab all the other stuff, you know, that goes with them. And I'm like, yes, we can do that. We had them pre-filled by the door. We were getting people out with litter boxes and litter, at least to keep them, you know, set up with stuff for 48 hours, and then they could come back and get more supplies as they needed. But people didn't want to have to be separated from their pets, and those that did need to board with us, it was a last resort. You know, we had conversations with every single person. It was really important to me that we were able to take the time to have those conversations initially, even though there's a huge long line behind them of people who are also looking for help. But you know, I think that provided a better outcome for a lot of people. And there was a lot of pets that got to stay with their people the whole time, you know, after the disaster. But yeah, I mean, I think it was just being a human, you know, and what can we do? You know, there was no, we don't do that, or, well, we don't really normally do that. It was like, we're going to figure it out. Yeah, we don't do that. We don't know how to do that, but let me make some calls. Maybe we can figure it out. You know, there's all these people that want to help. Maybe there's a donor that will just buy that for that person, you know, because of all the exotic animals that were coming, because people were having to flee with reptiles that needed, you know, tanks with heat and power. You know, people that were maybe able to stay, they couldn't drink the water in their home. There was just an array of things that people needed. And if we could find it, or, you know, make a call and connect that person with that resource, I was more than thrilled to be able to do that and say yes in the moment instead of, you know, I mean, we got requests that normally everyone would be like, well, what are we going to do about that? I'm like, I don't know. We're going to figure it out. Like, I'm going to tell this person yes, so that they can at least experience like some relief from the stress, and we'll figure it out, you know?
It was a reminder, you know, one of our ideologies that helps kind of continue to shape the culture and how we respond to the community is that in order for us to be, you know, effective advocates for animals, we have to be people driven first. And so, yeah, I think the fact that we were able to not have to worry about housing was secondary. You know, the primary goal was to help these people. So again, connecting them with whatever they needed, like we wanted to help the community. And it was a reminder that in order to do that, we have to advocate for people, be people driven as much as we want to be for animals.
100%.
Thank you both for your advocacy, and thank you to the Red Cross LA. And you know, I see now that they're posting about keeping animals and people together, and it's beautiful to see. And I hope they're also showing that we're seeing the results of that, of like, oh right, people want to support that. Yes, we want to keep animals with their people.
Yeah.
In just this last couple of minutes, what advice would you give to other organizations who might be hesitant or to think, oh, we can't do that? Yeah, what advice would you give?
You want to go first, Laura?
Sure. Let me just look at my notes because I did think about this. I guess asking people what they need or letting them explain their story instead of prescribing things to them in the moment. You know, if someone had, you know, birds and dogs and reptiles, like letting them actually talk about their whole story and give them a chance to express themselves. And maybe they're going to tell you about their house burning down too. And they're also going to tell you how devastated they are. They're going to burst into tears in front of you, you know, I think the advice I have is, I think it's easy to be of service when you have compassion and treat everyone with empathy and take the time to pause and like tap a shoulder and say, I'm so sorry. You know, we have our mission, which is, you know, trying to make sure people get the resources they need so they can co-shelter, but truly the human connection is the most important thing, human to human, so that we have the best outcomes for people and their pets. And so, you know, it's busy, it's chaotic, it's stressful, but just looking the person in the eye, you know, and really having a real conversation instead of there's 500 people that need our help. What do you need? How can I get it? Okay, let's get it out of here as quickly as possible. You know, I guess my only advice is to not fall into that. You know, people will remember this for the rest of their lives. They will remember if you know, gave them a hug, if they were open to that. They will remember if you gave them a bottle of water, or just that, oh, you need this? Great, here you go. You know, that they will remember that for the rest of their lives. And I will too. You know.
Yeah, I think part of my advice would be, you know, to any organization that has to do this in the future, you will be asking a lot of your staff and volunteers. And you're going to see that in the spirit of community-based solutions, that there needs to be opportunities for the community to help, because it's their community too. And so being prepared with, you know, what those roles look like. But yeah, I think, you know, my advice is a little bit more logistical and tactical. I think figuring out where you need to move resources, what no longer needs to exist, or it can be temporarily suspended. And that, you know, organizations like ours are usually filled with people who are very talented and passionate. And it's just a matter of getting them into the right place so that everybody can be effective.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Thank you both so much, Chris, Laura, Lexis. Thank you for kicking us off with the incredible research and this important information. I wish we had more time. This was such a wonderful session. Folks can connect with you on Whova. I also wanted to mention that we have a counselor available all day. If anybody's feeling like they'd like to connect with someone, Shoshana Mosteller is available directly in Whova. You just reach out to her. She'll be available all day today. So thank you all for joining this session, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Lexis.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.